Welcome. My name is Professor Roberta Cold, and I'm here today to talk about I'm Not There, Racial Presence and Racial Absence. And in this installment, we'll be talking about the hijacked narrative and the impacts that negative stereotyping has on the African American community. So let's talk about impacts. What kind of effect does this have? A lot of times I hear, well, it's just television, it's just movies. Nobody believes that. But it's part of a constant repetition of these images that actually have very real impacts on the community. So, for example, we have, Newsweek and Time. On the left, we have Newsweek. On the right, we have Time. Same picture. It's the mugshot of O.J. Simpson when he was arrested for the murders of Nicole Brown, Simpson, and Ron Goldman. The Newsweek looks pretty much like the actual mugshot. Time magazine actually at first tried to say it was a printing error and then finally admitted that they had deliberately gone in and photoshopped O.J. Simpson's face to make him look blacker so that he would be more menacing. And again, this is part of this repetition of the constant imagery that says blackness equals scariness. Blackness equals violence, and the darker the skin, the more afraid as a white person you should be of these people. So we see things like even in benign ads that shouldn't be using this kind of imagery. We see this too. Here's an ad for Intel. And one of the things that happens is that black men are underrepresented as using computers or being technical experts in television commercials. So the next time you're watching TV, just watch how many times is a black guy seen fixing the computer or being a smart person, and how many times is the black guy coming to fix your washing machine. So in this ad, we have Intel, we have a white guy standing in the middle of the room, and for some absolutely unknown reason that does not have anything to do with faster computers or better performance, you have all of these men of color bent over like they're getting ready to run a race. And you have to ask, okay, why is he white and why are they men of color? Why are they doing the grunt work and he's standing there with his arms folded being in charge? So one of the things we also see is some actual health impacts is we've seen some interesting spikes in smoking rates and drinking rates among African American youth that we'd not seen before. For a long time, we spent a lot of time, especially in anti-tobacco advertising and looking at media images in the tobacco industry, looking at why was it that African American youth were not particularly heavy smokers, and it was kind of interesting. And they were not particularly heavy drinkers either. But we found between 2002 and 2005, there was this rather extraordinary spike. And we couldn't figure out what it was because nothing had dramatically changed in how African American youth were being impacted in the community until we started looking at music, and especially hip hop and rap. 64% of rap songs and hip hop songs have alcohol references, and not just any alcohol references. It's not let's go get a generic beer. These are specific brand names. 63% of rap songs contain not only just an alcohol reference, but a specific brand of alcohol. And R&B and hip hop, 24%. So huge numbers here that are out of proportion, that are not just advertising, hey, let's go get drunk. And as an interesting contrast, you don't see this at all in country and Western music, which tends not to be advertised to African American youth. So one of the other impacts that we're seeing is the narrowness of what is being thought of as something to aspire to by African American youth. So we're seeing, because of so many of these images are so narrow, we're seeing so many African American youth telling us, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, I want to play for the NBA, or I want to be a rap artist. And those are great professions. The problem is to get to that, there's so many decisions that they have no control over. So you can be the most talented basketball player on your high school team. You can be the most talented rap artist in your community. That doesn't mean you're going to get a giant record contract and be Lil Wayne. It doesn't mean you're going to play for the Celtics. You're left with these very narrow ideas that are all other directed. So all the decisions about whether you get on or off the team or get a contract or don't get a contract have really nothing to do with your actual level of talent. So in many ways, with this narrow idea, we're setting these kids up to think that these are the only two options they have to be super successful. And again, the problem with that is that these are things that less than 1% of kids are ever going to be able to achieve, no matter how talented they are. So let's also talk about why this is important when we talk about media, and specifically with African American youth. And one of the reasons why this is particularly important for African American youth is that, quite frankly, they watch more television than any other group. We found white youth watch about 2.5 hours of television per day. African American youth watch considerably more, as much as 5, for a lot of reasons. African American youth also tend to report more favorable attitudes to TV, and they're more likely to say that they looked to television for information and guidance than other ethnic groups. And one of the things that became really obvious was studies that have been done where they strongly identify with a black character, their self-esteem was actually stronger. So seeing those people on screen that look like them, act like them, sound like them, are just like them, that increased self-esteem. But the opposite happened when African American youth strongly identified with white characters. So again, if we're talking about kids only ever seeing people who don't look like them and having only characters to identify with that are white, it actually lowers their self-esteem. So let's talk quickly about the hijacked narrative. And a hijacked narrative is when a group in power basically alters the focus of the story to talking about themselves. So, and also not only just making it about them, but claiming that their experience is exactly the same. So think about Mississippi burning. It changes from being a story of 3 young civil rights activist workers, I will point out 2 of whom were men of color, and their murder in Mississippi, and it becomes instead the story of Gene Hackman and William Dafoe who go down south and solve the problem. So instead of being a really important movie, what could have been a really important film about the civil rights movement and the pain and suffering that went on in the civil rights movement and this extremely painful particular incident within the civil rights movement, it turns into a hero's story about William Dafoe and Gene Hackman. Thank God white people came along and fixed everything. Which leads us to the next slide. The Help, I find a particularly irritating film, and I have lots of problems with it on a number of levels, starting with the fact that the whole point of it was a very wealthy, privileged white woman who basically decided to write a book because she, and I quote, wondered what her maids were thinking, unquote. And it's basically a story about, well, thank God this white girl came along and told our story because God knows we'd never be able to tell it ourselves. And you see the same thing with Sandra Bullock in The Blind Side. The movie is not about the black football player who's struggling. It's about the nice white lady who came along and saved him, and thank God she did, because he'd never have been able to do it on his own. And it's interesting because The Blind Side actually got a lot of flack from the community involved, based on where the true story actually happened, because there were a lot of people of color who were involved in supporting this young man and contributing to his success that are completely left out of The Blind Side, the film with Sandra Bullock. It's narrative. It's all about her. And isn't she a good person for doing this? And isn't this uplifting because this nice white lady saved this black kid? So probably the worst example I've ever seen is this. On the left is the card, the sort of vote for us card that Family Guy sent out. And on the right is the poster for the movie Precious. So Precious is this extraordinary film about African American poverty and this extraordinary young woman who overcomes all kinds of difficulties. And it's a painful film to watch, but it's really quite extraordinary. But Family Guy takes this and says, well, us wanting to win the Emmy is exactly the same. And they even co-opt the whole poster and then tag this line on the end of it, vote for us or you're racist, which is just based on the novel Push by Sapphire, which, there's no way Family Guy is based on that. It was just absolutely horrendous piece that Family Guy to this day says, well, we thought it was super funny. It was just funny. We were making a joke. So let's talk about the word colorblind. Colorblind has kind of an interesting history, and it's often said by white people who think that it's something nice to say, well, I don't see color. I just think everybody's the same. Okay, it actually has a not quite heinous history. The word originally comes from Justice John Marshall Harlan's, who was the lone dissenter in the landmark 1896 case Plessy versus Ferguson that basically legalized separate but equal, which was basically the Jim Crow laws. Um, he was the lone one to say, no, this is wrong because we shouldn't be and what he was saying was we should be colorblind because we should be making legal determinations not based on the color of someone's skin. So that's the original way it was used. However, it's been co-opted by conservative media. And they use this as sort of a shorthand, mostly to prop up their opposition to affirmative action. So the way the narrative runs in the conservative right-wing community is color blindness means the government should never take race into account, even when it's a way to promote racial equality. So, for example, you should just have separate but equal because that's good, because it's equal. The fact that separate but equal has at its very heart horrendous inequality. They want to point out, no, that I'm just being colorblind. I'm not being racist. I'm being colorblind because everybody should have this. Everybody has the same opportunities. When in actual fact, the reality is that is just simply not true. We know people lose jobs, lose homes, don't get mortgages, get charged different rates of interest, all of these things because of their color. So to say that, you should never take into account race, even as a way to promote equality, that's just, it's nonsense. And it's the right wing's way of using this term to make, no, I'm colorblind. You're a racist. I'm colorblind. So probably the worst of the hijacked narratives, and this really does bear talking about, even though this particular incident is over, unfortunately. The handling of the Trayvon Martin case in the media was absolutely horrifying. Regardless of what you think about how the verdict came out, it's not so much about the verdict because, and I'll tell as a legal person, that was based on a whole lot of decisions that got made about the way the law was written, but it's more about the way the media handled this. And so right afterwards, you had a whole huge slew of things about, well, here's Trayvon Martin, and he's not really this cute little kid. And I think you have to really read the text and the picture on the left. This was a meme that was created on the internet. I'm sure you've noticed all the angelic 4-year-old pics the media has been showing nonstop of Trayvon Martin. Have you seen these pics? Probably not. They're not selling any t-shirts with these pics from Trayvon's Facebook on them. Now here's the important part. Now imagine Trayvon dressed in a hoodie, a disguise, stalking a neighborhood on a rainy night. So even after the verdict, the issue has been completely hijacked to George Zimmerman was right to be afraid of Trayvon Martin. This was a scary kid. And I will point out the picture on the bottom of the Trayvon Martin meme on the left-hand side. That's not even Trayvon Martin. That's another kid. They just pulled some random black kid and figured, oh yeah, that looks like Trayvon Martin. That must be him. It's actually not Trayvon Martin. But what happened was this incredibly painful tragedy in a number of different communities gets rewritten, completely hijacking the fact that Trayvon Martin was actually not doing anything wrong. He was not committing a crime. He was not doing anything that should have ended in his death. So we see this, and the New York Post, Trayvon hoodwinked, tragedy hijacked by race hustlers. So people taking this and turning this into an issue about race when it wasn't really. Yes, it was really. Trayvon Martin he came to George Zimmerman's attention, maybe, possibly because George Zimmerman was a racist, but I think more importantly, because of this constant repetition of the image of young black men are scary and threatening. And then as a result of that cultural ideal that young black men wearing hoodies should be feared. And obviously, if this kid is in the community, he's up to no good, and you should be afraid of him. This is what ended up with this young, innocent 17-year-old's death. And so even this tragedy turns into something that's really about white people feeling justified in being afraid.